Good afternoon. I'm Dr. James Conyers, Director of Africana Studies here at Kane University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2016 celebration of Africana Studies at Kane University. We always begin our celebrations at Kane University in November. And November, we usually have a 3 or 4 day lecture series, of which this is a part of, where we begin to grapple with, understand, explain, debate issues related to the African community. And when I say African community, I'm talking about not just people born in Africa. That's a common misunderstanding among African people. I'm talking about everybody of African descent. Part of my mission here as Director of Africana Studies is to instill in African people a sense of oneness, a sense of Pan-Africanness, recognizing that no matter where we were born, we are Africans. If you were born in Haiti, you are an African. If you was born in America, you are an African. If you was born in Trinidad or Jamaica or in Russia, wherever you may have been born, or in continental Africa itself, you are an African. Simply because we call ourselves African Americans doesn't mean that we're not African, because the first part of it says African American. So you're an African wherever you were born. This is a common misunderstanding among African people that we need to flesh out and explore a little bit more to bring about this sense of oneness among our people. Hopefully, as you continue to come to our programs and other programs at other universities and colleges and other outside programs, and quite often you can find me at an outside program speaking somewhere to the Haitian community on Haitian Flag Day or someplace around the New York City area or around the country and sometimes around the world, you'll begin to grapple with these understandings, become clearer in your own thinking about who you are as a people. Before we introduce the speaker, I'm going to say one final thing, and then we'll talk afterwards. Malcolm X used to say, and I was one of the young students who happened to see Malcolm X and learn from him, used to say, you can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree itself. You cannot hate Africa and not hate yourself. As your understanding of and attitude towards Africa becomes positive, so will your understanding and attitude towards yourself become positive. From this day forward, there should be nobody here in this audience who leaves this audience today and uses the N-word to describe themselves for any reason. I don't care if 50 Cent says it's okay. I don't care if Jay-Z says it's okay. It ain't okay. And if you take my class or any of the classes taught by professors like myself here at Kane University, you will find out why it's not okay. So with that being said, thank you for coming once again. And we're going to get right into introducing our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is one of our distinguished colleagues here at Kane University, longtime friend of mine. We started at Kane University around the same time. I was here a little bit before her, but not much before her. And we've become great associates, and we've done a variety of things. We can always count on her here to become a part of the Africana Studies program, to do any number of things, including the African Heritage graduation. So let me just read a little bit of her bio and have her come up and talk about mental health in the African community. Dr. Boyd Jackson is presently an associate professor in the School of Psychology at Kane University. She is the coordinator of the dual major program in psychology and psychiatric rehabilitation. This is a joint program between Kane University and Rutgers University School of Health-Related Professions. She is the current chairperson of the School of Psychology Personnel Committee. In addition, Dr. Boyd Jackson maintains a part-time private practice in Union, New Jersey. And so, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Sharon Boyd Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Conyers, for that wonderful introduction. Okay. I'm going to make sure that I speak into this mic because I know that I'm soft-spoken, so I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Dr. Sharon Boyd Jackson, and I'm in the psychology department. Some of you may know me. I know some of you out there. Some of the faces are familiar. I'm really happy to be able to do this presentation because I get to dress up, and I don't do that very often. I want you to, as I begin, to do something that you don't normally do in school, and I do this sometimes in my classes. I just want you to close your eyes for a minute. And as you close your eyes, I want you to think about what mental illness looks like. I want you to imagine that you are walking down the street and you see a person who you think might be mentally ill. And what does it look like to you? Okay, you can open your eyes now. I don't know where you went, but I was wondering, is it a homeless woman that you see begging in the street? Is it a man who seems to be talking to himself with no apparent earphones or being connected to some sort of electronic device? Or is it a friend of yours who just seems to always have difficulty, maybe difficulty in relationships? We all have preconceived notions of what it may look like for a person who might be mentally ill. Our preconceived notions really is just our ignorance about what mental illness is. And I don't know, am I talking into this mic? I can't tell. Can you, as long as you can hear me, we're fine. So thinking about what mental illness looks like, we are, I think, all probably ignorant about what mental illness is. And ignorance is bliss, right? Until it happens to us, or until it happens to someone that we know, a family member, we often don't necessarily want to know about mental illness, about what it's about. So my first point is that we all have preconceived notions about mental illness. And we all experience stressors in society. And I believe that we have all probably had a bout with depression. Some of you may be more frequent than others when you think about depression and feeling depressed. So we probably all had some experience with what we think is not quote-unquote normal, or our days that maybe have not been normal. Some of you, may have experienced depression or a depressed mood. You ever wake up depressed and not knowing why you're depressed? You wake up and you're like, yeah, I'm not feeling kind of depressed today, not sure why. Sometimes we experience that more frequently than others, and some of us it's more mild, and some of us more severe. So how do we identify mental illness? Is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's in its 5th edition currently. The first edition was in 1952, and this is what the healthcare field uses to diagnose mental illness. It's connected to the World Health Organization and also to the International Classification of Diseases. This is published by the American Psychiatric Association. And it's with every revision of this particular manual, they have been attempting to make the manual more valid and more reliable. Why is that? Because it's not valid and it's not reliable. Often, different psychiatrists may diagnose the same set of symptoms in different ways. And so there's been a problem since 1952, since its first edition. And it's currently in its 5th edition, and it's attempting now, because psychiatry is very close to the medical field, this edition is attempted to be aligned and more aligned with the International Classification of Disorders. That is international classification of disorders that's put out by the medical profession. Okay, so I think we all, maybe you don't know the difference between psychiatry and psychology. I know sometimes people confuse me. I'm a psychologist and they call me a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists actually have MD degrees, so they get medical degrees, so they are medical doctors. And their mainstay in terms of treatment is doing drug therapy. Whereas psychologists, their mainstay is doing psychotherapy, and we get educated in doing psychotherapy and research and trying to find the best ways to help individuals that have disorders. Okay. So how does this process relate to people of African descent? I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history. And there is a history of diagnosing. And when we think about the first diagnosis of African people, Benjamin Rush, who was considered the father of psychiatry, he was a known humanitarian and an abolitionist. And despite this honorable title, father of psychiatry, and his honorable, supposedly, ideals to abolish slavery, he was known for the first diagnosis of people of African descent. Drapetomania was one of those diagnoses that he coined, and it meant that slaves were trying to run away, trying to get out of slavery. Oh, they must be crazy. They must have some sort of disorder to not want to be in this paternal relationship with the slave master, right? So he coined this term, drapetomania, which is the flight away from home madness. It's one of the first. I'm sorry, this was, I'm getting mixed up. Samuel Cartwright, who coined that, and Benjamin Rush, the father of psychiatry, was described negritude as the cure to become white. So the cure to become white, if we're labeling slaves negritude and the cure to become white, is there a cure? Is there ever a cure? You know, so. Although he was honorable in some respects, the belief of African peoples as being human, as being inferior, was solid. And so I'm not sure his abolitionist quest did not merge with his description. And then there was Samuel Cartwright, which I already described, who coined the first diagnosis. And Louis Agassiz believed in the biological inferiority of various species. And he helped to promote the idea of a white supremacy. So this is the initial diagnoses in this country that was occurring for African American people. And it goes on because there were pseudoscientists that were, or pseudoscientific results that were developed because Thomas Jefferson, who had slaves, wanted to justify the reason for slavery. And his justification, or his attempt to justify, he commissioned scientists to inform us of some of the ways that they were inferior. And so scientists then came up with these ways. Samuel Morton, who's known for craniology and looking at skulls, collected human skulls to prove superiority, inferiority of the races. And of course he found that whites had the largest skull, and so largest brain, and blacks had the smallest skull and smallest brain, and so we supposedly were inferior. Frederick Hoffman, another scientist who touted pseudo-ideas, came up with the Negro extinction theory. And this particular theory, it looked at, Hoffman was an insurance agent as well as a statistician. And he was interested in selling insurance. And in order to sell insurance, he needed to look at the rates, the mortality rates. And he identified the fact that Negroes, at that time we were called Negroes, they were dying at large rates, dying early, and so he came up with this Negro extinction theory because there was a belief that Negroes were not human at that time, or at least of a different race and different species, that eventually they were going to be extinct because of the high rate of mortality. So a lot of the early psychiatric journals were influenced by these racist views. The early psychologists were influenced by these early scientists, as well as the medical field was influenced by them. G. Stanley Hall was our first president of the American Psychological Association. So now I'm talking about psychological. So I'm going to be mentioning psychiatry as well as psychology, and I've already, distinguished between the two. So the first president of the American Psychological Association, and although he didn't believe that Negroes could not grow. He didn't believe in the extinction theory, but he did believe that Negroes were immature, that and eventually maybe could be civilized and to evolve, maybe on par with whites. So these racial theories utilized the ideal of instinct and instinct theory. Blacks supposedly had instincts, or Africans had instincts of submission, and whites had instincts to control and lynch. Again, pseudo-theories. Early psychologists were also, influenced by this, and there was lots of research on black and white comparisons in the early 1900s. There were views that highlighted negative effects of racism that sometimes led to overgeneralizing and talking about, there were studies on looking at self-esteem, comparing whites and Africans and African Americans with each other, and coming up with the ideas of inferiority, that the African Americans had low self-esteem, and often some of these studies did not even assess self-esteem. They were comparing certain behaviors and then making the assumption that it was self-esteem or low self-esteem that influenced the comparison when you saw when you saw different rates, and maybe blacks being lower in terms of intelligence, or having maybe more disease, or low income, those kinds of things. And so self-esteem became a big term that was used. I even did my dissertation on that when how long ago was that? Let's see. I'll tell my age a little bit. Well, not really. But I did my dissertation, I'll just say, and I was looking at the racial self-esteem, or and aspiration levels. And I wanted to look at whether or not the aspiration levels of children were influenced by how they felt about their race, and whether or not the negative ideals and negative stereotypes influenced them. And one of the things I found was that, and I also looked at self-esteem. So I looked at, self-esteem is a very broad category. And so there are different aspects of self-esteem. So self-esteem could be related to your achievement. It could be related to your competence in different areas. It could be related to how you view yourself in terms of your race. And so there's different aspects of self-esteem. So I looked at general self-esteem as well as racial self-esteem, and I found that there was a difference. I found that even though these children tended to have high self-esteem, when I assessed their racial self-esteem, it was lower than their general self-concept, and I also found that their aspiration levels were high in some respects, sometimes too high. One of the things I found initially, and I looked at aspiration levels in two respects, with a puzzle task as well as just asking them what they wanted to be when they grow up. A lot of the students said that they wanted to be either some sort of celebrity or sports player, and these were I knew that the media was influencing this. It's like, okay, and so I decided to ask them, if you couldn't be, Beyonce or whomever, and she wasn't around back then, but who else would you be? And then I got more realistic answers. So although they had these ideals and being influenced by the media, they were also had a plan B. And that plan B then was to either be a fireman or a teacher or a truck driver, and being influenced by the people around them. And so anyway, so this idea of self-esteem, internalized self-hatred was floating around, but the decrease in self-esteem, as I said, was not necessarily being assessed in a lot of these studies, and a lot of these studies were omitting looking at strengths that these kids had, the strengths and the resilience. So, and my point is that these early studies were influenced by the early pseudo-racism of the pseudoscience, early racism of the pseudoscience. In 1954, you guys know about the Brown versus Board of Education and the Mamie and Kenneth Clark's doll study, which led to segregation of schools. So this also influenced how we looked at how the environment and racism is impacting our children. And the doll study, I thought, was really interesting in terms of our young children saying that they did not like themselves in terms of, but I recognize that as them talking about their race and the things that they hear about their race, the things that they heard about their race, the things that they could and could not achieve because of their race. Freud's penis envy, it was the same thing with women. Women were upset with that because they said that, whoa, you could not, we are not envious of the penis. We are envious of the power that the penis has. We are envious of how it's valued. We are envious of how men are valued. And we want to eliminate being second-class citizens. Same thing here with African Americans, all right, and our children. Yeah, when they chose that white doll, they were interested in the value that that white doll had. They were interested in the power that that white doll represented for them. Now, President Clinton, we know that you guys may not necessarily have been happy of some of his, some of the things that he did when he was in office, but one of the things that he did in 1998 was commissioned a task force, race advisory task force. And this task force concluded that race is one of the most divisive forces in our society, that race legacies or the past continue to haunt current policies and practices that create unfair disparities between minority and majority groups. Race inequities are so deeply ingrained in American society that it's nearly invisible. And most white Americans are unaware of white privilege and how their attitudes, actions, unintentionally or intentionally, well, unintentionally, because the ones that are intentional, no, unintentionally discriminate against people of color. So how does racism impact us psychologically today? There are two types of racism that we tend to see today, and the symbolic and modern racism that can be seen in the conservative folks. These are folks that, this is connected with old-fashioned racism. This is connected with people who believe in individualism, that believe that, you know, race is real, that race is biological, you can't change it, you are, you know, lazy because that's who you are. So all those negative stereotypes that are connected with race, and I say old-fashioned racism, which is the more overt racism. Versus racism is implicit racism. This is where a person who might be seen as liberal, but have egalitarian values. They believe in equality for all. And even though they believe in equality for all on a conscious level, may be reacting or interacting on a less than conscious level. So when the two people come in for an interview who have similar values, similar competencies, and you have one black, one white, one African, you know, and one white, who's going to get hired by this person? They may not see the fact that there is a need for change in this society, that there is a need for diversity in this society. There is going to be a tendency for that person who is engaged in aversive racism to choose the white person. That person's like me, and I think that that's okay. And there are people that argue that my preference is for my people. And fine, your preference can be for your people, but what are you doing about racism? How can you contribute to changing that? You know, maintaining my preferences for my people does not help making any change, and it doesn't help in terms of the effect of racism on people of African descent. The implicit, I have a hyperlink there the implicit association test. It's this test associated with Harvard University, and what it does is it helps to identify unconscious values. So if you go online and you decide to take this test, you might see that you are holding some biases. You can look at, well, let me tell you how the test works. What it does is it will show you maybe pictures. Let's say you want to look at male and female bias. It'll show you pictures of men and pictures of women, and then ask you to associate words with the picture, with either picture, in a split second. So the words will come up as either negative words or positive words, and usually those words also relate to stereotypes that you might have about one or the other. Stereotypes, in this case, sexism and stereotypes about women. And you may find that each time you push the button or click or choose one of those words, you might end up choosing more negative words for women, or more words that relate to stereotypes about women. Why? Because often we've internalized these stereotypes. Why? How have we internalized them? Because they are in our environment. We see them all the time. And so if you are a person who is race conscious, is conscious about racism, and has worked hard on trying to eliminate the stereotypes that you have, then you might do well on this test. So I'm not sure. Check it out. All right. So I said male and female, but they also have it for racism, black and white pictures, and for other areas of bias as well. So how does this history relate to mental illness today, or more specifically, stress? APA, now I'm talking about the American Psychological Association. So the American Psychological Association conducted a survey to assess the impact of discrimination on race. And one of the things that they found, well, you can see for Hispanics, who experienced racism tended to have more stress. So what we're looking at, experienced racism and stress. In this particular study, this is just one study, it's a national study. It was done in 2015. But in looking at their data, their blacks also, in these are the terms that they used, Hispanic and black. Now, you might be wondering, why do we have like whites there experiencing stress, discrimination? Well, when I looked further at that, they said that the Hispanic and blacks, when they talked about discrimination, they were referring to racial discrimination. And whites on this scale were actually referring to age discrimination. So that whites tend to be experiencing more age discrimination in this day and time. And we know that we have a lot of baby boomers, and that seems to be maybe a problem for white Americans. So this scale just looks at the employment related stressors, and as you can see, that last one, that blue area, that's the American Indian and Alaskan Native together. So it's not just American Indians, but American Indians and Alaskan Natives together, and that might be why it's high, because we're talking about two different groups. So, but you see, the issue of employment is one of the stressors for people of African descent, and also not just employment, not being hired, but then when you are hired, being treated unfairly and not receiving, feeling like you're not receiving promotions. In my practice, I work with a lot of people of African descent, actually. I do, on occasion, have a white client, but most of my clients are people of African descent. And one of the things that I find in terms of employment, I've had people come in and say that, well, man, I didn't get that promotion, and I really deserve it. The person that got it really didn't, and there's a reason. And they would talk about all the things that they did to describe why, to make themselves valuable, to make themselves in a position to get that promotion. And they would finally then come to the realizations like, whoa, I guess I didn't get it because I'm black. I mean, they would say, well, I tried working harder, I knew it was coming, I worked longer, I got this evaluation that wasn't bad, but, my supervisor wasn't so happy with me, and so I tried to work smarter. So I did everything I could. And now I'm realizing that, okay, there wasn't anything else I could do. That it must be racism. So I'm saying that because a lot of people think that we identify. You okay? You okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That we identify and play that race card like all the time, and often I don't see that in my practice and the people that I work with. They are sort of working hard to try to overcome the obstacles that they see. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Okay. So this is just stress and emotional support that came out of this survey. And it's really just speaks to the fact that emotional support, when a person has emotional support, it helps in terms of dealing with stress. And so we know stress can lead to burnout and also depression. How many stressors does it take to bring a person to the brink of depression? We know that there's something called everyday racism. There is everyday racism. You guys have experienced it. That everyday racism is those individual slights, those looks that you get, the being treated, the feeling of being treated unfairly, the feeling of being followed around in a store, the feeling of someone being discourteous to you and not treating you with respect. I experienced that, just yesterday. I went into this pharmacy, which was near my house. Hadn't gone in there. I think it was my second time going in there. But the person behind the counter hadn't seen me before. I hadn't seen them before. And she was constantly looking at me, asking me, well, what are you looking for? Well, I came in for some aspirin. I'm gonna get that. And, I just want to look around. I might want something else. And she had some other gentleman come to find the aspirin for me and just stand there and wait to watch me. I'm like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm not buying aspirin. I don't feel comfortable. And, I'm not going back there. That's the everyday racism that, you might experience or feel. and then employment racism, which we've talked about, police harassment. There was also in this study, in terms of stress, it found that I believe it's 2 out of 5 black men in the study that filled out a form, complained about police harassment, being harassed by the police, being threatened by the police, racial profiling, and then there's the environmental racism. You've heard of environmental racism? Your environment. What do you see in your environment? What do you see in your neighborhoods? What do you see when you walk into a building? Do you see yourself? Do you see things that are that might be somewhat threatening to you? Maybe someone has hung a noose somewhere, or maybe you are looking at, I don't know, violence. When we think about environmental racism, we have to look at what's in our environment. What does our environment tell us? And not just what you see when you walk into a building, but the media. What do you see in the media? What do you see on TV? When you do see people of a color on TV, what are they doing? Are they acting like buffoons? Are they, in a position of power? Those are the things that you need to think about, because that's the environmental racism that impacts us that we don't even think about on a daily basis. So looking at your environment, being aware of your environment is important, because it can impact us without us even knowing that it impacts in some way. So when you think about all these stressors, and how we integrate them or how we experience them, some of us, it takes maybe a longer time than others for it to actually impact us, but eventually, those mornings, how I started out, those mornings when you wake up feeling depressed and you don't know why you're depressed, this could be why. It could be the environment. It could be the things that you're being told about yourself, about your race in the environment that impacts how you're feeling. These are some of the symptoms of depression, and the DSM diagnoses depression in this way, where you have to have some of these feelings, some of these criterion within a 2-week period. And I haven't listed them all, just a few, just to give you a sense of what depression is. Okay, now I've talked enough. I have a video that I want to show. Snapping the chain.
Because sometimes when you have a mental illness, you feel so different. It's like you're not even, you feel so disconnected. Like I can't even feel like other people feel, When I would burn myself, the sound of the needle hitting my skin, I could hear my skin burning. It brings back that, okay, I am human, I am here because I can feel this pain.
I went to prison twice. Both times it was drug related. My first time going to prison is when they put all the labels on me. The psychiatrist will talk to you for 5 minutes and give you a diagnosis. And 9 chances out of 10, it's wrong. And you really shouldn't be there, because that's taking the guy that has mental challenges and placing him with the guy that's just a straight up criminal. And you know what's going to happen. It's going to be trouble.
When I was 8 years old, my mother and father asked me who I wanted to live with, and I chose my father, and that really, really hurt her. At that time, she could not see that I was just a child. She just saw someone who she loved leaving her. And so as a result, I hated myself for it. It was a very traumatic event for me because I was like simultaneously disowned by both of my parents. So I think that is what really brought about the depression and the anxiety, because I couldn't understand why I was even born, why I was even here. And so I started to do a lot of self-mutilization. I looked really ugly and just disgusting. I just felt like I was just a worthless person.
I can say the trauma and the scars that we carry and the pain that we carry, and it's not okay to talk about it, you know, and I don't care, because the truth needs to come out.
I didn't want to die without having my voice heard. I felt like there was some reason why I had gone through the things that I had gone through, and there was some reason why I have depression, and people need to understand that. And I feel like that couldn't be something that could be written in a suicidal note.
So a lot of my experiences, I didn't realize how painful they were until I became mature. You know, and then I realized the hurt that I carried and the reason that I acted out in the way that I did.
This kind of self-hatred within ourselves, it's this perception that everybody else has around us. We've taken it in and we've kind of lived it out.
You feel like it's something wrong to admit that you have some form of mental challenge.
Taboo in the African American community it can be hard. Both my mother and father have that they're carrying that weight of our ancestors, of their parents and what they went through. So much mental damage was done to the African American community through slavery.
They'd much rather tell you that they got AIDS before they tell you that they have some form of mental illness. And it's just that much stigma.
When you're seeking help, when you're trying to become well, if you get a deep cut and you go to the doctor, you don't say, oh, that's a white thing, I'm not going to go to the doctor. My leg is bleeding and I'm losing feeling, but I'm not going to go to the doctor.
The first thing you have to do is remove the so-called stigma from it.
Because African American people...
I'm sorry, I want to stop it here because...
People need to really comprehend what mental health illness is before we can proceed with any other, area of achievement in America.
Today I'm challenged because I suffer from major depression. And I'm fortunate to find a man that treated the depression and not just zonked me out so I wouldn't be a problem.
Everybody needs support. Everybody has that one person or that friend or whoever relative, whoever, that they call on when they just need to talk to somebody. And that's really what therapy is.
And I finally started to believe that I had a chance, that I was going to be okay, after so many people told me I would never make it. And I do mean so many people.
The moment that I actually found out I was having a daughter, the first, I honestly cried. But now that I have my daughter, she is like my saving grace. I'm trying to focus on just letting Zion be a kid and focus on what I tell her, the words that I use. Because I think that we kind of forget that our kids, maybe our kids, but they're human beings in the making. And the things that we teach them, the things that we do to them has a huge effect on what they do in their adult lives and what they're going to do to their children.
Being a black man, it's very hard to show any kind of fear or show any kind of feeling sometimes, because it's just not sociably acceptable. And you got to be a man for those kids of yours. Yeah, well, I want my kids to be honest. I don't want them to live the lie. The chain snapped with me. My boys will never go through what I went through.
Okay, so this is snapping the chain, right? Making change, and change is important. One of the reasons why I wanted you to see this is to actually also see that depression in itself can be chronic and can impact us to the degree that we tend to isolate ourselves and not utilize the supports that we have. So support and emotional support is important. You know, according to a recent survey, when we look at the prevalence of depression in the community, people of African descent are less likely to have major depressive episodes more than whites, but when they do have it, it tends to be chronic. So this particular study reported that 10.4% of African Americans and 12.9% of Caribbean Americans, as opposed to 17.9% non-Hispanic whites, experience major depression. And those that did experience major depression in the African American community, 56.5% was chronic, and for Caribbean Americans, 56% chronic. People of African descent tend to be much less likely to consider even going for treatment, and that was even more profound in the Caribbean Americans. That's that last point, 45% of Americans will seek some type of treatment, but the numbers drop when we think about when we look at the African Caribbean. African American women tended to also show higher rates of MDE, which is major depressive episodes, than their male counterparts, but it was the same for the Caribbean Americans. Males and females were on par. And marriage tends to lower the effect of depression in all groups. Older adults showed lower rates of depression than younger adults. And and this was interesting too. In the metropolitan areas, of course, there was higher, bouts of depression, where the southern and rural states lower. Okay. So I wanted to sort of end with, I know I don't have a lot of time, in talking about coping skills and the things that we do use in order to try and combat depression. Generally, when we're faced with depression, there are two depression, there are two models that we tend to use to resolve the stress. One is problem focused, the other one is emotion focused. Both of these strategies can be useful and helpful. The problem focused strategies are you're actually going to take steps to try and remove the problem or make a decision. But the decision you might be making at the time is this racism or not? Or in any particular situation, and that can cause a strain. The many times that we deal with that everyday racism, trying to cope, trying to decide, is this racism or not? Or how do I respond in the moment when I'm feeling attacked? Those are the problem-focused steps. Emotion-focused strategies help us to try to regulate our emotions, because when we are feeling attacked, we end up with heightened emotions and trying to figure out, well, what do I do with this? How do I deal with it? Sometimes with the heightened emotions, it impacts us making a clear, valuable decision that's going to help resolve the problem. And so we may need to use a emotion-focused strategy first to calm down before stepping in and trying to make change. There was some research on high-effort coping, and that research really looked at associated high-effort coping with people that tended to have higher educational status. There was actually but mixed results in terms of that. So high-effort coping is not necessarily I guess the answer to us dealing with stress. But high effort coping is really it's just continuing to strive despite facing individual or even institutional racism, and we do that, and it can be useful. It is useful because we do it and we have to do it. But there are times when we have to know, when do we step back? When do we need to go and talk to someone because this is not working for me anymore? And it's important to be able to do that, rely on family support, rely on emotional support that we might get from our friends, and our own resilience, which is part of that high effort coping. So the last thing I want to talk about is a little bit about dealing with racism in the therapeutic process. And it is important when you are working with an individual to be aware of the worldviews of culturally diverse clients, being able to address race openly in treatment, and mental health programs and training programs also need to support trainees' ability to be able to identify racism in general and in themselves in particular, understand how racism, including their own race, can be detrimental to clients of African descent. Most clients, when they go in for therapy, they are looking for someone of the same race because they believe that that person is going to understand them and be able to help them better. And it's important to, I think, even have more therapists of African descent to meet those needs. Accept responsibility for taking corrective actions to overcome racial bias, and of course developing more innovative research techniques to improve the treatment and understanding of racism and its effect on mental illness for people of African descent. Okay. Yeah. I'm ready for questions, so you want to? Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Boyd Jackson. Can we have an applause for Dr. Boyd Jackson? We were talking before the program began, and we had a little bit of apprehension, as we always do when we do public speaking. And I just want to assure Dr. Boyd Jackson that she did an excellent presentation. It was very thorough. It's in line with other great psychologists like Joe Fagan and others who, in his book, Living with Racism and other such works, Dr. Bobby Wright, who she doesn't want to compare herself with, but she did as good a job as right now as Bobby Wright has ever done, in my opinion. And so that's important. And I'm hoping that Dr. Boyd Jackson, at some point in time before we go into the question and answer period, will even put together a book list for many people who might want to contact her to have a beginning book list to begin to do this study. I come to it differently. I come to it from the world of history. She comes to it from the world of psychology, but we meet at the same place. So I would recommend that she does that, and we can begin to look at these issues and define the issues a little bit better. I like to call this presentation, because this is the first time we've done this, and I believe 20 years. And we've been sorely neglecting and talking about mental health and wellness in the African-American community, the African community in general, because as a historian, I mostly focus on the historical issues and neglect this kind of issue. But I like to think of this as, introduction to health and welfare, wellness, introduction to understanding race and racial politics in America. And I think we need that more than ever as a result of what happened the other day. I think we're going to see a lot more mental illness coming out that we need to begin to understand. So we're going to visit this again, and we're going to have Dr. Boyd Jackson come back again and again and again, as long as she's willing to do this over the course of however long we're here at this university. Yeah, we've been here a while, but we're going to continue to do this at least as long as I'm Director of Africana Studies and as long as she's in the psychology department. Again, we've done this, we've worked together for a number of years. So with that being said, we're going to now move in for the next 15 minutes or so, questions and answers. And if you have any questions for Dr. Boyd Jackson, please stand up. And if we can't hear you, if you don't talk loud enough, I'll bring the microphone and ask your questions. Everybody should have some questions. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. Well, I agree with the psychologist that the election and the result of the election for people of African descent is traumatic, and it was really a traumatic blow, because we did not necessarily expect, well, I know I didn't, the results, but I mean, I kind of felt like I knew, not that I didn't have any expectations. I knew it could go either way, but still, the fact that it happened, the fact that he is president after all the things that he says and who he supports, and it is like a re-traumatization. And I think that people are depressed. I mean, I've heard people talk about it. I haven't had anybody come into my office yet in terms of needing some sort of assistance. But when we get depressed, and we all experience it at some point in time in our lifetime, and very often depression is common, we have to have specific coping skills, and we all have our own coping skills in figuring out, well, how do I deal with this? And some of us turned the TV off. We don't want, yeah, that is environmental. Shut it down. I don't want to to hear it, I can't hear it. And it is traumatizing. I mean, I took my parents to see Birth of a Nation, and my mother walked out of there saying, you know, I closed my eyes. I couldn't see a lot of it because of the felt re-traumatization for herself. So yeah, it's there. And I think that, you know, I may have people coming in for treatment in reference to that. But definitely environmental racism, it's out here. And it's been out here since Obama has been in office. You know, we've been hearing, you know, the way he's been treated as a president. A president has never been treated like that, never been called a gorilla and calling, you know, out of his name. So, yeah, we are people that have experienced trauma. We know trauma, you know, and I think it's important for us to know also how to help ourselves and how to deal with it. Yeah.
One second. You just, they can't hear you.
Oh.
Sorry about that. We need to do this because otherwise we won't be. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
I was going to ask, do you believe that like social media and other forms of networking have contributed to that kind of depression? And also, the other question was about the overall stigma that you talked about of getting help with mental illness. Why do you think in our culture and in pop culture is that looked down upon?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back and forth so that we can get everything. Do we have another mic anywhere? Oh, yeah, you might want to do that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know with the camera. So that's a really good question. I think you had like a two-part question, and I'm going to reiterate. I think, yeah, the media does play a role in terms of the environmental racism. You can probably do your own study as you watch, go home and watch TV today and pick out things that might be insulting to you as an African American male. The second part of your question, why don't we get help, is I think essentially you're asking. And so there is the statistic in that particular survey said that less than half of African Americans and even lower, I think 23% of African Caribbeans tend to go for help and treatment. And there's a reason for that. The racism in itself that a person feels or has experienced has led to a distrust of the system, especially when we think about institutional racism. If I go in for help, first of all, am I going to get it? How is this person going to view me? Is this going to be a mark on my record? A lot of clients come in and ask that question. If I come in here and I'm treated by you, what is my employer going to say? Is my employer going to find out that I'm here? So there's a lot of healthy paranoia about getting treatment, going into any kind of institution in this society because of racism.
Do you have any other questions? Oh, you have a microphone? Thank you.
All right. Also, I feel as like going into your question, there's also the pay as well as too. Money does become a very vital issue when it comes to seeking help, definitely into the mental health field, because a lot of feel like insurance companies won't feel like that's truly needed if there's not a prior diagnosis given to that person. And as to speaking to your question about like the whole election thing, I feel as if that it's nothing new, what we're experiencing. We have to remember that we've had 43 other presidents before Trump who might have taken his sides too, but they were less out in the open. They were more so in the closet about what they were trying to implement or really how they felt. It's just that's the prevalency of how it's all in your face now, and now you have to deal with it directly. And then and people don't know how to, because we're a very non-confrontational society. We like to go the escape route around things. We don't like to deal with things very head-on, and he's a very head-on person. So it's trying to adapt to a different way of living, to the point now we're going to have to, the frequency of it, it's not more so him, it's more so the people we have to take note of, because you never know where somebody care is that particular day and whether they want to, I guess, inflict harm or inflict hate, whether it be mental, whether it be physical.
Well, I'm glad you said that, brother, because it keeps me from having to say it. Several things. Number one, for me, this election was a statement on the national insanity. That's number one. Number two, I'm glad you said what you said, because for me, I don't think that we as African people in this nation needed to be traumatized. I think that a people who are historically, politically, and culturally astute would have recognized and had no illusion about what this place is all about, and would have recognized what was coming down the pike, one way or the other, and be prepared to deal with that, historically, culturally, and politically. After several hundred years in this country, with all that we've gone through in this country, as you've just pointed out, we should be prepared for this. I think part of the problem is that we, too, have an illusion about what this place is all about, and that we're not thinking correct in terms of who we are, what we are, and what our place is in this so-called nation. So I'm glad that you said what you had to say. I know probably now I'll still get tons of hate mail, as I always do, for saying what I just said, but that's okay. I can handle that. You know, maybe one day I'm going to come in here and do an entire lecture on this, what happened recently, in terms of the implications for us as a people, in terms of what we think America is, and even talk a little bit about this whole idea of the Electoral College, which many people are not talking about, so that we can understand the relationship between the Electoral College and slavery, which we're not talking about. All right, so again, people who are clear, as Dr. Jacob Carruthers used to tell us, and know where they're going, generally are not traumatized by something like this. Although I understand the traumatization of this. All right, again, we need to do a little bit better in terms of our understanding of not only the history of this country and the history of ourselves, but of the history of the world. Any group of people who go around calling themselves by the N-word, that group of people are going to be traumatized. All right? And so we need to think more clearly about this. So I'm recommending, once again, that you begin taking these courses and reading the books. I mean, the courses are not enough at the universities, Dr. Sharon Boyd Jackson's course and others. We need to pick up something and read. There's an old saying, there's a really old saying, that if you want to hide something from a black person, put it in the book. I'm sure you've heard that statement before. So let's do some research, let's do some study, let's start asking some questions and do some critical analysis. Once again, you know, the people who used to do that and people whose feet that I sat at, including El Hajj Malik Shabazz, who you call Malcolm X, these were people who were very, very clear about what this nation's all about. That's my statement.
Hi, everyone. Just to piggyback off of what you had said and you mentioned, PASU, we just had a general body meeting, and our topic was actually mental illness. And a lot of the feedback I got from general body was the way to deal with mental illness or things they saw growing up was pray it out. Pray about it. If you're depressed, pray. And that's not always, you know, the solution, you know, like how are you, so that was one thing that a lot of general body members mentioned, and as well as in your presentation, in jail. They either saw family members be locked up in jail because they're out on the street, homeless, they've turned to drugs, etc., and they're told to pray about it and pray for that person that's out on the street when that person needs help. I love prayer, but it's not always the solution. So,
we have time for one more question, and then I have an announcement.
Prayer is one of those emotion-focused strategies to help us deal with it in the moment, but then the problem-focused needs to be done as well.
I don't really have a actual question, just more of a comment. I actually mentor a bunch of young girls between the ages of 14 and 18, and I usually follow them up from high school until they graduate. And I think that when dealing with mental illness and looking at social media, a lot of times we don't realize that our young women are not really taught to be aware of how you feel. You're not necessarily taught growing up that you are allowed and you have a right to be angry. You have a right to voice your opinion. A lot of times it's always pushed underneath the rug, and it's something that we're not really able to express ourselves. And I think that with the group of girls that I actually mentor, I realize a lot of times that you don't know how to trigger when you are changing feelings about yourself. And I think that, I guess one of the, I'm not sure what you would call it, exercises that we did is we had the girls track how they feel when they get up in the morning. So maybe today I wake up in the morning and I feel good about my hair, I feel good about the way I look, and maybe around 12 o'clock all of a sudden I cannot stand the color of my skin. And so we're trying to really teach them that what made you feel differently about yourself from 7 o'clock in the morning into 12 o'clock in the evening, 12 o'clock noon. What is it that made you feel differently? And then you notice that these girls are logging into social media, and you're looking at these girls with these generic bodies and these makeups and these faces that look so much alike that we're not really teaching, especially our females sometimes, to love themselves. And so when it comes down to mental illness, we bury how we feel, that we don't even know that we have mental illnesses. You don't even realize sometimes that there are problems that exist within our culture because we are just expected to push everything underneath the rug. And I think that as parents, and well, I'm not a parent, but just as a mentor, that if we can just teach our kids to express themselves, that it is okay to express yourself, that we are just really going to make more of an impact, I think, than we ever have, because it's just something that's needed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to say, as a professor here, that the question then becomes sometimes, even after this election, what do we say? And I don't know if professors have, if you all students, if after this election people come back into the classroom and say, so how are we feeling? Or what are we going to talk about? And I would like your opinion about that. I have a class tonight. But the question is, is it happening? Are the conversations happening in your classroom? I brought the comment up as it's really as what are the strategies, whether you are astute enough to recognize your trauma and whether you're in it, out of it, never left it, or whether or not you are shocked, and whether or not there are reasons to feel positive or optimistic and when you get up in the morning, or what happens throughout the day. But I think as within this environment on campus, in the institutions, how do we then, how does that translate? Because I like the fact of mentoring, but even as a professor here, how do you handle it in your classrooms? What are the strategies?
Yeah, I like the fact of the mentoring as well. I think it's important for young girls to be able to understand their own emotions and to be able to, regulate those emotions as well. There's so much to say. But I'll tell you, in my classroom, I bring it up and have brought it up, since it happened. And because my students have walked into the classroom, some of them are apathetic, some of them are angry, some of them are, just want to talk about it and want to process. And so we do. We talk about it, we process. I do ask the students to first, simply to express how they feel. And we do like a group go round, so everyone has a voice. And through that, the conversations begin. And what I try to do is to help, because I have students with different opinions in the classrooms too. You know, some of my students actually, you know, are happy that, you know, Trump is in office, and have some, say that they can see some positives about this person. So I allow the debate to happen as well. And I think it's healthy for the students to be able to express it, to be able to debate. And then I try to help, you know, I try not to be too one-sided, but I try to help the students to see the impact of this person as president. And so I do give my opinion. After, though, everyone has been able to express their opinion. So we talk about coping strategies. We talk about what you use for, coping strategies as well. I mean, it's not a therapeutic environment, but so that's all I can do, or I feel, in terms of, So it does get talked about. It's been talked about. I mean, students come in the classroom talking about it. You can't stop it. Yeah.
Thank you for coming out. We do appreciate it. We hope that you learned something and you were introduced to something, and hopefully you'll continue to come out and you support us. We're going to be here tomorrow, and we're going to be here on Thursday, and we're going to have some very lively discussions and some lively topics. Before we leave, though, I just want to announce that between 2:15 and 2:45, right here in the pre-function lobby right next door, for anybody interested, we're going to be doing some blood pressure screening. So if you want to get your blood pressure taken, we'll have some people inside there who will take your blood and talk with you and all those things. And so, I know the university does it quite often, but this is the first time that Africana Studies is actually doing it. And we're going to do more of it. And please stop by and get your blood pressure taken. I mean, I think Dick Gregory once said every black person in America has high blood pressure except for Michael Jackson. His pressure is too low at the time that he was alive. But anyway, I think that if you want to, and this is not just for us, it's for everyone, please stop by, get your blood pressure taken. That's a major problem in the United States, along with diabetes, and we're going to be dealing with all of those issues of physical and mental health. So once again, let's thank Dr. Boyd Jackson for a wonderful presentation. Okay, I'm actually proud to know her. She just makes me feel, I don't know what she makes me feel, but I'm proud to know her. So thank you so much for coming out, and hopefully you'll come out tomorrow. We're going to have Dr. Celestine here tomorrow, and then on Thursday, we're going to have another psychologist here. Dr. Vanita Hambar will be here on Thursday to discuss, I believe, women's issues and health. And so tell your friends, come out. We like to fill this place up. This is for you. This is why we do it. And one other thing, on December 15th, all of you are invited to celebrate Kwanzaa with us. So if you don't know what Kwanzaa is, and if you've never celebrated Kwanzaa before, we're going to be in Downs Hall, so we want all of you to come out and celebrate Kwanzaa with us. We're going to try to feed as many people as possible. Basically, it's first come, first serve, so make sure you get there early. And we're going to have some entertainment, and we're going to discuss Kwanzaa, and we're just going to have a good time, okay? All are welcome. It doesn't matter who you are. Thank you so much.